Captain Brandon Walker, a decorated Air Force pilot, had always lived his life on the edge. He found his solace in the skies, where his fighter jet sliced through the clouds at supersonic speeds. His entire career had been defined by high-stakes missions and moments of life-or-death decisions, but none of it rattled him. His friends joked that he was born to fly. He seemed more at home above the earth than on it. While others saw him as a hero, Brandon himself felt there was a void in his life, an unspoken longing he couldn't define. Brandon's demanding career left little room for personal connections. He had tried relationships before, but none had lasted. Flying all over the world had its perks, but it also meant constant goodbyes, and the women he dated eventually grew tired of his unpredictable life. So, Brandon focused on his one true love, flying. Little did he know that his next journey would change everything. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, Anne Margarette was boarding yet another international flight, preparing for the 15-hour journey from London to New York. Anne was a stewardess, and like Brandon, she had dedicated herself to a life in the skies. Her life was glamorous on the surface, filled with exotic destinations and encounters with people from every corner of the globe. But beneath her composed exterior, Anne was restless. Her friends often teased her about her whirlwind lifestyle, asking when she would settle down and start a family, but Anne would laugh it off, telling them she was too busy for love. She adored her career, but like Brandon, there was an unspoken loneliness that followed her from airport to airport. On this particular flight, Anne had been assigned to business class. She enjoyed the calm professionalism of these passengers, a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of economy. As she made her way through the cabin, serving drinks with her usual grace, she noticed a man seated by the window. He was different from the typical business travelers. There was a quiet strength about him, a calmness that intrigued her. It was Brandon. He was on leave after a grueling mission, finally taking some time to visit his family in New York. Normally, he would have been asleep by now, letting the hum of the plane's engines lull him into a rare moment of rest. But something about the stewardess caught his eye. She was poised and professional, yet there was an unmistakable spark in her that Brandon couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long while, he felt drawn to someone. As the flight progressed, their paths crossed. Anne found herself standing by Brandon's seat, offering him a refill of his coffee. Their conversation started casually enough, small talk about the flight and destinations. But as they spoke, they both realized this was not just idle chatter. "You fly a lot, don't you?" Anne asked with a soft smile, her curiosity piqued by Brandon's quiet demeanor. Brandon smiled back. "I do, but not on planes like this." Intrigued, Anne raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what kind of planes, then?" "Fighter jets," Brandon replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm a pilot in the Air Force." Anne's eyes widened slightly. She had met countless travelers, but never someone who lived on the edge of life like this. "That sounds intense," she said, her tone a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "It has its moments," Brandon said with a shrug. "But I imagine your life isn't all that different. Constantly on the move, seeing the world from up here." Anne nodded thoughtfully. "It can be exciting, but it's not as glamorous as people think. Most of the time, I'm too busy or too tired to enjoy the places I visit." There was a moment of understanding between them. Two people whose lives revolved around the skies, but who both longed for something more grounded. What started as a simple conversation turned into an exchange of stories, dreams, and vulnerabilities. By the time the plane landed, they both knew this was no ordinary encounter. After that flight, they stayed in touch. At first, it was just friendly messages and brief phone calls between flights and missions. But as weeks turned into months, their connection deepened. Brandon would send Anne photos from the remote parts of the world where he was stationed, while Anne would update him on her latest travel adventures. Despite the distance, they found a way to grow closer. Their lives, however, were anything but simple. Brandon was constantly deployed on dangerous missions, often in war zones where communication was scarce. Anne, too, had a demanding schedule that kept her moving from one city to the next. There were times when they wouldn't hear from each other for days, even weeks. But neither of them gave up. In one particularly tense moment, Brandon was on a mission in the Middle East. He had been in radio silence for days, and Anne, back in London, was anxiously waiting for any news. She had never felt so helpless. The skies that had always brought her freedom now felt like they were keeping her away from the one person she truly cared about. When Brandon finally called, his voice weary but alive, Anne let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "I'm okay," he reassured her. "But I've been thinking, we can't keep living like this, waiting for life to give us a chance to be together." Anne, tears in her eyes, knew he was right. "I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to keep missing you." Their next reunion was in Paris, a city neither had planned to visit but found themselves in by chance. As they stood on the banks of the Seine, the lights of the Eiffel Tower twinkling in the distance, Brandon took Anne's hand. "I spent my whole life chasing the next mission, the next flight. But the truth is, none of it feels like home anymore, except when I'm with you." Anne smiled through her tears. "I've been flying for so long, I didn't realize I was running away. But I don't want to run anymore, Brandon. Not from you." In that moment, they made a choice. They knew their careers would always be important, but they couldn't let it keep them apart any longer. They decided to build a life together, grounded in the love they had found despite the odds. Anne adjusted her schedule, taking fewer international flights to be closer to Brandon. And Brandon, though still passionate about flying, began considering his future beyond the Air Force. They moved into a cozy home on the coast, where they could still watch the planes overhead but from a new perspective. Together, hand in hand, their love story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And every time they looked up at the sky, they were reminded of the journey that brought them together. A love that soared above the clouds but found its true strength on the ground. In the end, Brandon and Anne realized that while the skies had given them their careers and adventures, it was love that gave them their home. And as long as they had each other, they were ready to face any horizon, together. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to help my YouTube channel grow.